So let's begin, as we always do, at Microsoft headquarters in Washington. Now, what's going on there? What are these people up to? Well, they are worrying about how to provide the absolute best customer support to people. Someone's working on the computer and they've got a problem, and they call Microsoft, and Microsoft says, yes, we're going to try to fix that. Have you turned it on and off? Have you tried, wiggling the cord? Have you done this or that? And then pretty soon you've worked your way to a point where they're like, what do you see on the screen? And how does that look? And what happened when you click this button? Did you really click the button? What are you clicking? And it becomes problematic. So what you need is a tool to support remote diagnostics, because then you can provide better support. And in fact, that's what the Microsoft Support Diagnostics tool does. It's a tool that lets Microsoft support personnel gather information from your computer and provide remote troubleshooting. And it can run stuff. Of course it can, right? Because you need to run things to generate reports, you need to run things to take actions, etc. And the way it would typically work is you would contact support, and they would tell you, okay, press the Windows key and R and run MSDT.exe, and it'll ask for a passkey. Here's the passkey that you will enter to start it. Which naturally takes us to Eastern Europe. And you see a few countries here in red. You'll obviously, I think a lot of you now, in the past you might have had a hard time distinguishing some of these, but now you know that that's Ukraine because you recognize Crimea, and you're like, ooh, there's the Black Sea. And so here's Russia, and here's Russia. Russia has an exclave. And here's Belarus. And these two countries are of interest to us. Not this little square country up here. I think that's just that's meant to be a legend for the map, and I didn't fill it in. What happened was there was an interesting document discovered in May of this year in Belarus, and it used Word's external link to load HTML, and then used MSDT, remember that from our previous slides, to execute some PowerShell code. What's going on here? Well, here's the payload of that, and you can see window location href, right? What is this doing? That's a property of the window. Location's property there. Href is the reference to the website or the web page. It's the contents of it, and we set that to be MSDT : what is that? Well, that is a schema that tells our system we want to use the Microsoft Support Diagnostics tool. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes after it. So what did I mean when I say Word and link? What's going on there? Well, sometimes Office templates, or even Office documents, contain content that they need to download from the web on your behalf. A template especially might have graphics or sounds or other stuff that it needs to download from the web. I said sounds? What? Yes, of course, right? There are sounds that go into slideshow presentations, for example. And this is not always obvious, right? A document is going to act on your behalf, but it's just a document, so you should be fine. So here's what happens. Explicitly open a template, and then the template downloads some HTML from a URL, and then that HTML contains some JavaScript, and then the JavaScript opens a URL with the scheme MSDT, and then this launches the MSDT tool and runs untrusted code. Right? JavaScript opens the URL. Yeah, that's what we saw here. This is JavaScript. That all sounded fine until you get to that last part. I don't like that last part. Right? Well, it turns out you're partially protected. Right? Word document isn't automatically going to do all this stuff. You've got to open it and maybe even authorize an action. Alternatively, you could use RTF, in which case even previewing the code can run it. That's not great. But what happens is this line gets run. And what does this do? This doesn't look like anything to me. It's just a bunch of gibberish there. What's going on here? Well, if we dig into this, we'll find out that it's encoded. So if we go back up here for a second, MSDT, PC Diagnostics, skip force param, and then we have all this stuff here until finally we get to this, UTF-8, get string, convert, and then we have a whole bunch here, and then we have the important part from base 64 string. So if you know what base 64 encoding is, congratulations, because that's what's happening right here. It says base 64 encoded. And what does it decode to? Well, we can just snip this piece out, and we can do a decode of it, base 64, and we get this. Command equal, command exe, start process, command, which would be this, command exe. Window style is hidden. That seems interesting. What is that about? We'll come in a minute. Argument list, task kill, MSDT, start process, window style hidden, so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. There we go. What's going on here is we're running PowerShell. And if we just start a PowerShell prompt, we end up with a new window. So we use window style hidden to create a window that is invisible. We don't see the window. Well, that's not great, right? We're running potentially malicious code, but we're running it as a normal user. So when you think about it in the scheme of things, is it really that bad? I mean, sure, they're running arbitrary code as your user, but it's as your user. It's not elevating to admin, so it merely gets a 7.8 on the score here, on the CVSS score. Because the file used has the name 05-2022-0438, and because 0438 is the area dialing number for Follina, this vulnerability has been dubbed Follina. And there you go. Pretty simple vulnerability. Again, I'm exploiting the fact that there are parts of the computer that may have capabilities, like running code, running untrusted code, and do that on my behalf without me necessarily knowing it. If you want to know more, there's a great write-up, and if you want an exploit for it, there's a exploit, of course, up on GitHub. Be aware when a program can take an action on behalf of a user that the user is unaware of. Or I should say, take an action that the user is unaware of on behalf of that user. That's bad. That's probably most of the time, so, use your judgment. There's homework that's due. The homework is to write some Python code that processes a CSV and returns a differentially private, average, and standard deviation. Write it in whatever language you like. And that takes us to today's main topic, the confused deputy. Now, normally, when people introduce the confused deputy topic, they like to include a picture of a particularly famous deputy from the Andy Griffith Show. Deputy in Maybury. Andy Griffith was the sheriff, and he had a deputy, and people like to include a picture of him. Don Knotts played the deputy. But you all are too young for that, so instead, I'm going to go with Deputy Perkins, because who hasn't watched The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo? Well, we've all watched The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo. Deputy Perkins is a perfectly good example of a very confused deputy. But seriously, a deputy is a program that acts on your behalf, but which may have different privileges than you do. It may be able to do things on your behalf, and it may in fact be able to do things that you yourself couldn't do. And so, for example, a deputy might be allowed to run red lights and arrest people, and you can't do that. But maybe you can trick the deputy into doing those things for you when it really shouldn't. And that's the issue we're talking about here. Can I trick part of the system into doing something for me that it really shouldn't do to benefit me? The confused deputy is everywhere. It's in the physical world, and not just in the computer world, but in the physical world there are confused deputies. We've already seen this. An SUID program or an SGID program, a little less common, but they definitely exist. Usually directories are SGID, is an example. Abusing the print spooler was an example, right? The print spooler has special capabilities. We were able to abuse the print spooler to get it to install DLLs and run those DLLs for us when we shouldn't really be able to have done any of that. But this print spooler acted as a deputy, became confused, and allowed us to do that. Confused deputy is very common. Swatting, right? The practice of swatting, of calling up the police and reporting a hostage situation at someone's house so they'll send a SWAT team. That's an example of a confused deputy, right? I mean, you don't have the power to load up 20 of your friends in tactical gear and, pile out of that person's house, bust in their door, and point guns at everybody without, being guilty of a serious crime and potentially being arrested. But the SWAT team can do that. So if you trick the SWAT team into doing it, the SWAT team has become the confused deputy in this. Okay. Over on the right, it's a picture of an actual confused deputy, but, police things can be political, so let's swap that out for this. So if you've seen Die Hard, and I assume everyone's seen Die Hard, if not, watch it at Christmas. It's a Christmas movie. A particular... There was a hostage situation in a high-rise building. A team of terrorists led by Hans Gruber, who's pictured here, seize the Nakatomi building and take hostages. And they want to steal money from a safe. But to open the safe, they have to disarm certain parts of it. And to do that, they have to turn off the power. Well, they can't turn off the power to the building. It turns out that's somewhat difficult to interrupt the power. The safe is set up so that you can't interrupt the power unless the building's power is interrupted. So they can't go outside to do this because the police are outside. And if they could, how would they turn the power off, right? They don't know where the circuits are to turn the power off, and it's probably technical, and switching power for a big building is not trivial. So how do you do it? Well, what they do is they get the FBI involved. The FBI shows up, and part of the FBI playbook is to cut power to the building. So Hans Gruber tricks the FBI into doing the thing he can't do, namely cutting power to the entire building. The FBI becomes, in this case, a confused deputy. The original confused deputy from the paper that introduced this to the computer science world had to do with a compiler and a billing file. So older systems had this compiler, and we'd run the compiler. Typically, you were charged, or your account was billed for computer time. If you never endured that, great. Some of us have had to endure that, where you're charged for, you have a certain budget, and you're charged for compute time, and you're charged for printing and other services that go against your account. And so the compiler runs, and it gets to update the billing file to show that you ran a compile. Well, the compiler is able to write to the billing file, but you're not. If you could write to the billing file, that would be cool, right? You would copy the billing file, you'd run the compiler, do your printouts, and then you'd overwrite the billing file with the old version of it, and so you weren't charged anything. Hooray, everything is free, it's a beautiful world. And then eventually they can't pay for the computing center. So you should be able to write to the billing file, but the compiler should. So if we map that out, if you write that down in the form of what we would think of as an access control list, this little access control table here. The user should be allowed to execute the compiler, but the user shouldn't have any permissions for the billing file. There's no need for you to read it or write it. Makes no sense to execute it, so there you go. The compiler should be able to write the billing file, and it should be able to call the compiler as well if it needs to. Sometimes you issue a subjob in the compiler. So this little structure here tells us what we need to know. If the user tries to write the billing file, the system says, nope, you can't do that. If the compiler tries to write it, it says, sure, you can write the billing file. But what if you ran the compiler and you have to specify where the output of the compiler goes? And what if you told the compiler to write its output to the billing file? It's just a file path, right? What happened? Well, the user can execute the compiler. The compiler can write the billing file. And so what we wind up with is the user has tricked the compiler as its deputy into overwriting the billing file on its behalf. It overwrites the billing file with, let's say, the output from your compile, which is gibberish in terms of billing, and the billing file is destroyed. No one can prove that you actually used any computing time. Mission accomplished, right? This ticks off a lot of boxes. So let's think about some other examples of the confused deputy. So in modern times, we have these things called websites. And if you look over on the right, you'll see a mock-up I made based on my banking application. So I mocked one up. There's about 1 million different ways to mock up web pages, and I just grabbed one of the online ones and threw it together. But this is what they typically look like. You select an account, select a payee, select an amount to pay, a frequency at which to pay, the select date, memo for it, enable payment alerts, all this stuff. You fill this out, and then you submit it, and your bank will schedule a payment. It will electronically transfer funds from your account to someone else's account, maybe a credit card company, you're paying a bill, maybe the gas company or the water company, maybe somebody that bought you dinner. It'll transfer the money on your behalf. Now, if you're a malicious person, what you'd like to do is have somebody transfer money to an account you control or have compromised, so that then you can use that money to buy your ill-gotten gains. So how would you do about doing that? Well, let's think a little bit about how all this stuff works. From your browser, you log into the bank. And when you log into the bank sends you cookies. Cookies? Yeah, cookies are little pieces of information associated with a browser session. So the bank sends you back these little key value pairs, and we call them cookies, and your browser stores them. And it stores them for the duration of the session. Sometimes they have expiration information on them. The next time your browser communicates with the bank, it sends the cookies as part of the request. So back here, the bank authenticated you, maybe with a username and a password, and maybe it used two-factor authentication and sent you another link on that. But the end result was, you don't want to do that once. You don't want to do that every time you do a request. So the bank sends you a cookie, and you send it back each time, and that cookie tells the bank that you have authenticated and you have an active authenticated session. That cookie is how it knows. So then you go to the bank, and then you can issue an electronic fund transfer to send money somewhere. And the bank will do it because the cookie shows that you have an authenticated session. Well, what if I go to another website? So happyandfun.com might be out there. And you go there, and that website, once you've browsed there, it knows a little bit about you, and it tries to initiate a money transfer, right? It goes to the bank and says, hey, transfer money on behalf of this guy. And the bank says no, right? Because you don't have the cookies for the active session. So the bank's like, I don't know who you are, or what it is you want, or what's going on, but no, we're not going to do it. So maybe what you do is you go to happyfun.com and it sends you back a web page, and that web page has a hidden form on it. Is it possible to do that? It is absolutely possible to do that. You could put it below the current form in the stacking order so that the browser basically paints one on top of another. It's obscured by it. It's like putting one window behind another. You could move it off the screen. You could set the size to something different. There are many different ways to hide a form. But the form's on there, but it's hidden. Okay? The hidden form that goes back. And that hidden form launches a connection to your bank's web API and tells it to send money. And because your browser has cookies for your open connection to the bank, assuming you've logged into your bank recently, it transfers those cookies with the request, and the bank sends the money. So you see what happened? I went to the bank and logged in and had the cookies. The cookies are in the browser. Meanwhile, I browsed over to Happy Fun. Happy Fun sent back the form, which then immediately triggered trying to make the bank transfer money. And since the cookies for the open session were there, it worked, and it sent the money somewhere. What happened? The web browser became a confused deputy. The web browser has your credentials for the bank in the form of the cookies you got during the logging in, and it saw the form, which executed and said, oh, you must want to do this, and did it. This is called a cross-site request forgery, because I'm forging a request to send money, and I'm doing it across sites. Okay, so this is one site. Oh, here's another cross-site forgery, CSRF. This is a type of what we would call injection vulnerability. We've injected the hidden form into the web page sent back by Happy Fun. And during the injection attack, untrusted inputs or unauthorized code get injected and get run. And that's pretty common, right? There's SQL injection attacks, there's server-side request forgery, a different kind of request forgery, PHP injection attacks, and so on. That's why you sanitize your inputs, right, to avoid things like SQL and PHP injection attacks. Well, what do we do about this? That hidden form's a problem. Well, it turns out there's different ways to defend yourself. One is go in your browser, log into your bank, do your banking stuff, log out of your bank account, and then close your browser. Right? Then the cookies aren't there anymore. The session's terminated because you logged out, and what the heck, close the browser. If the cookies aren't there anymore, then there's no way for the adversary to trick it because it doesn't have the cookies. Another way to do this is for the bank to return, in addition to the cookies, a little secret code. The secret code is an additional piece of information, and it is time linked to a particular form. So I log in, I get back the cookies. Then I request, let's say, the form to show my balance, and it sends that back to me with a little secret code. And then I request the form to transfer money, and it sends that back to me with a different random secret code. So every time I get the form, I get a different secret code associated with that particular instance of the form. Okay? It's an invisible field on that form, on that particular instance of the form. That's why it's different from a cookie, right? The cookies are per session. This is per instance of the form. So every time I get that form, I get an additional piece of information, but it's different each time. So then when I turn around and ask the bank to transfer money, I send the cookies and I send the secret code and tell it to pay the amount. The secret code matches what it sent me when it sent the form, and it says, yep, this is you. I know that because of the cookies, and you're sending me back the same code I sent you when I sent you the form. Those match. That's good. I'm going to go ahead and do it. And see how it breaks this? I browse here. It sends me back the hidden form, which tells the bank to pay, but they don't know for the hidden form what that secret code should be. So either they may not send the correct form, they might send an outdated one, who knows? But it doesn't just automatically go back as part of the cookies because I never actually grabbed that form. Okay, how do I get around this? Well, the obvious way to get around this is for the hidden form to be actually the bank form. So Happy Fun will go to the bank, retrieve that form, and include it as the hidden form here, so it would have the correct secret code. But that won't work because when I have two iframes, it's getting a little bit technical, I can't have information pass cross-domain. There's cross-domain restrictions. They have to have the same protocol and the same host and the same port, or I can't communicate information between them. And in this case they would, and so that would be prevented. So this additional little code breaks my ability to do this, right? I send back an outdated, incorrect, or missing secret code, and the bank says no. Make sure you understand that. Are there other forms of this confused deputy attack? Of course there are. There's lots of them, right? Clickjacking is one that's moderately common. An attacker sends a link to a target website through email, social media, or other media. You get a URL in your email, or someone posts a thing on Twitter and it's got a link, and you click the link. The victim opens the link in the browser, and the victim gets back a thing, right? Click here to see if you want a prize or whatever, and that UI element that you're clicking is secretly like the submit form, which then passes information back. It basically hijacks your click to do something else. Transfer money, buy stuff online, and send it to the attacker, whatever. All right. So part of the way in which we saw the confused deputy manifest earlier was through that little table. Remember the table where we said the user could write this or run the compiler but couldn't write the file? Those are access control lists. Access control lists have been critiqued a million different times. I like this paper, ACL's access control lists don't, but they don't control access. ACL models unable to make correct access decisions for interactions involving more than two principals, right, the person and the compiler, since required information is not retained across message sends. And that makes sense, right? The compiler was going to write to the billing file on my behalf, but it shouldn't be able to do that, right? I don't have permission to write to that file. It should only be able to write the billing file for its own purposes, not because I told it to. All right. The solution to that is something called capabilities, okay, which we'll talk about next time. Some notes. I have an office now. My office is just down from the classroom in 426. If you come by and the door looks like it does in this picture, just knock and come on in. Okay, so come on by. I'll typically be around before class and after class, preferably after class. Come on by and see me if you have questions.